Thinking Fast and Slow is by far the single most overrated book in all of behavioral economics, and in this video, I'm going to tell you why.
Joy and pleasure to millions of music lovers.
So this is my copy of Thinking Fast and Slow. As you can tell, it's pretty battered, and that's because I've had it for a very long time. The first time I read Thinking Fast and Slow was over 7 years ago now, and is when I was first getting into behavioral economics. I just watched these awe-inspiring talks by people like Dan Ariely and Rory Sutherland, and so I wanted to learn more about the field and I wanted to read a book. So when I asked my friend, who knew a little bit more about the field than I did, what book should I read, he recommended me to read Thinking Fast and Slow. I was told that Thinking Fast and Slow was a must-read book in the world of behavioral economics. And so, off the back of my enthusiasm of learning about this exciting field of behavioral science, I went out and bought Thinking Fast and Slow and tried to read it that summer. But my goodness, it wasn't easy. The book is comprised of over 400 pages of what is predominantly academic tedium, and it explains cognitive bias in some of the driest language possible. In fact, it's so dull that most of my behavioral science friends who have masters or PhDs in behavioral economics haven't even made it to the end of Thinking Fast and Slow because it is just that boring. I did manage to make it to the end of Thinking Fast and Slow, but I think the only reason I was able to do so was because I was reading it in a remote village where my grandparents live in Malaysia, which is pretty free of distractions. And for a couple of years during my A-levels, I took the word of Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow to be absolute gospel. But then I went to Warwick University, where people do behavioral science for real and they actually care about scientific accuracy. And they told me, yeah, you know all that stuff you read in Thinking Fast and Slow? Yeah, forget all that. All of that is wrong. Despite them being far more qualified than I was, I just couldn't accept that these ideas, which I'd fully internalized as being true, were in fact false. But as I've learned more about behavioral science and all the more modern research, I realized that Thinking Fast and Slow is riddled with problems, and unsurprisingly, those people with higher degrees than me were totally right in what they were saying. The main issue with Thinking Fast and Slow is poor replication. If other researchers do the same thing as you and get the same results, then that's called replication, and it's a sign of scientific accuracy and that the things that you found out are more likely to be true. Now, for those of you who are invested in the world of social science, you'll know that social science is full of replication problems. But when it comes to the level of failed replication in Thinking Fast and Slow, the results are truly shocking. A professor called Ulrich Schimak wrote an article about the replication problem of Thinking Fast and Slow, and he created what he calls a replication index for all of the chapters that have empirical results. And what Schimak found in his investigation was truly shocking. Of the 13 chapters in Thinking Fast and Slow that have empirical results, 7 of them had a replication index of less than 50%. That means that when you're reading these chapters, more than half of what you're reading has been proven false through failed replications. Take a second to internalize that. You're reading Thinking Fast and Slow, and more than half of what you're reading is a lie. They are ideas that came out of really poorly conducted psychological experiments, usually because their sample sizes were way too small to actually have any sort of reliability. And the worst part about this is that not only is more than 50% of what you're reading a lie, but you don't even know which 50%. And so when you're reading Thinking Fast and Slow, you're literally playing replication roulette to see if the thing that you're being told is actually true or not. Now, in Schimak's replication investigation, the worst offender was by far priming, specifically implicit priming, which is the idea that if you're exposed to a stimulus outside of your conscious awareness, that thing can influence your future decisions. Some of the famous examples of implicit priming are things like getting people to say Zimmer frame, geriatric, pensioner, and as a result of thinking about those words, you actually walk more slowly afterwards because you're thinking about old people and how old people move. Doesn't replicate. Or the idea of the watching eyes, which is something which I believed for many years. The watching eyes idea was that if you just place some eyes that are watching over you, then you'll actually act in a more honest way. Yeah, watching eyes doesn't replicate either. Or another one was the idea that, if I leave some symbols of money, maybe a little stack of Monopoly money on the desk, then when I ask you to play a little financial game afterwards, you'll act in a more greedy and selfish way. Yeah, also doesn't replicate. Now, this stuff sounds ridiculous, which is why it got people so excited when social psychologists were saying that this is true. And it sounds ridiculous because it is ridiculous. This stuff replicates horribly, and we should stop teaching it to people. Now, before I carry on, I should make the point that this video isn't a hate speech towards Daniel Kahneman. I have enormous respect for Daniel Kahneman as the founding father of our field, and he deserves enormous credit, not only for his groundbreaking work in things like prospect theory, but also because when this failed replication stuff started coming to the surface, he was actually one of the first people to champion more replication attempts in order to disprove his own book wrong, which to me signals his values as somebody who appreciates the scientific method and wants to spread the truth about how the brain really works. However, while Daniel Kahneman is a great guy, he is still just a guy. He wrote a book, it's pretty old now, lots of stuff has changed since then, and so we should really stop recommending it. Ironically, one of the things that Kahneman talks about is the halo effect, which is the idea that if we like one aspect of someone, then we overestimate their other aspects, even if they're unrelated. And Daniel Kahneman has the biggest behavioral economics halo effect that exists in the field. He's the founding father, he's the Nobel Prize winner, and so we take everything that he writes or says to be gospel, when really, demonstrably, that isn't the case. So when it comes to recommending a book for people who are new to behavioral economics, I absolutely do not recommend reading Thinking Fast and Slow. I read Thinking Fast and Slow, and to this day, I'm still unlearning the lessons that I learned from the book, because so much of it has failed replications. And well, in more recent years, there are just so many other better books to read. I made a whole video about them if you want to know my suggestions of books to read. So that's why I don't recommend reading Thinking Fast and Slow. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, can you please give me a thumbs up, because it really helps me out. And I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.